So this is, we have up next here, Katy Börner, the Victor H. Ingve Professor of Engineering and Information Science in the Department of Intelligent Systems Engineering and Information Library Science, the Luddy School of Informatics, Computing, and Engineering. She is a adjunct professor at the Department of Statistics in the College of Arts and Sciences, core faculty of cognitive science, and founding director of the Cyber Infrastructure for Network Science Center at Indiana University. She became an American Association for the Advancement of Science Fellow in 2012. And when she's not doing all that, she is curator of the International Places and Spaces Mapping Science exhibit, where I first met her. I'm pleased to announce my colleague and friend, Katy Börner.
Thank you so much, Todd. And it's really a pleasure to have this 24-hour live streamed Macroscope interactive data visualization event. And it's so nice to see friends and colleagues and family members also here on the live feed. It's really an effort to bring everybody together, but also to give everybody an update of what just happened, because our lives are so fast and furious. And it is nice to sit back from time to time and say, oh, wow, we did all this. This is kind of cool. And one of the ways that I find really, really rewarding is that we can do this as a team. We can put on a 24-hour live stream where in former times you would have had to earn or own better. Yeah, I would have had to own a TV channel, which I definitely don't want in my life, but I think it's wonderful to just reconnect with friends and family this way, and to also entertain questions that might come from very different audiences. And so please do feel free to ask and answer questions in the chat. So this is hour number 3 out of 24. And it's on forecasting and visualizing desirable future. It's really an opportunity to see what can we do, not just by analyzing data from far in history or analyzing data that just happened to be created today, but really trying to use all that data that now exists to kind of look forward, to try to predict what would happen if we fund a certain area of research, for instance, or if we create a certain team, or if we hire somebody, or if we do a certain event, what might happen? And are the consequences desirable for many, or are they only benefiting a few? And so in order to do this, there are quite a number of computational predictive models now. And the exhibit has been really, really good in showcasing not just visualizations of existing data, but also showing some of the predictions of weather patterns, for instance, or political impacts that something might have. And so, as you know, there is the Atlas trilogy. So the Atlas of Science came out in 2010. And then 5 years later, there was the Atlas of Knowledge. And then the Atlas of Forecast actually took 6 years, not just 5 years of lifetime, and lots of people contributing. But really, really making sure that we know how to model and map these desirable futures. And so the next hour is really about this book and what you can learn from it, and what I learned personally from it, and how you can use it to try to have us all go towards desirable futures. So just like Todd showed the table of content for the Atlas of Macroscopes earlier today, this is the Atlas of Forecasts table of content. It starts with an introduction into the history and terminology of models, including why in the world would you even model something, which model should you use, but also the history of models. And then models that matter, kind of already showing some of the models that really had a major impact, not just the weather predictions that we enjoy, or the Amazon suggestions, or Netflix recommendations, but really models that have impacted how societies grow and flourish and thrive. And then there is a part 2 on methods, and we have an overview of the goals and frameworks and design and run and visualization and validation of models. But then you have expert-based models introduced, and descriptive models, which just take the data we have and analyze it, but also predictive models, and 10 types of predictive models that use different modeling frameworks, from dynamical equations to probability theory and control theory and epidemic models and others to really take data we have and then predict a little bit forward. And in some cases, you can change parameter values to see where you would go if you change parameter values. And that by itself is actually a great way to discuss what's in the data, but also to discuss what might happen. And then part 3 has features different models in different domains across scales. And I will zoom there in the subsequent minutes. And then part 4 in this particular atlas features the maps in the exhibit, and it features the last 3 iterations, the science maps for kids, the science maps for showing trends and dynamics, and the future of science mapping, very appropriately so for this book. And then we leave the reader with some concerns and some opportunities, but also some hopes of what we can do together to manage risks together, to build capacity together, to work on actionable forecasts together. And then, of course, there are many, many references and credits. And again, it takes a team and a village to create an atlas like this. So there are many, many which contributed in major ways to this book, including Todd also. And so this was really not born in isolation. There were many, many workshops that we conducted, one at the New York Hall of Science. So Stephen Uzzo hosted the event, and they actually really have rockets there. And if you have a data visualization at the New York Hall of Science, you compete with these rockets, which are really cool to see there. And so it's non-trivial to bring to the museum floor a book or a data visualization and then have it compared to some of the other really cool interactive displays at the New York Hall of Science. And then we also had it at the Wells Library here in Bloomington, Indiana. We had it in Amsterdam. We had it at the James McDonald Foundation funded event in Bloomington here also. And really, really nice to bring so much expertise together and to find out together how we can use computational predictive models. But let's go first back in time, because then the more you can go back in time, the more you can go into the future. So you might ask, well, why did you want a model? I think people are just inherently interested in what their future holds. And when you're a little kid, you might just wonder what kind of job you might have, what friend you might have, what family you might have, what you will be able to do in your lives. And then as you grow older, you have other ambitions and you want different questions answered. And I think it's really, really interesting to then build models that serve all the many needs that people have in terms of understanding where they are right now. Some of us actually don't really understand where they are right now. To understand the past, I'm here on the top right, to understand the past, because only if you know the past, you can make sure that you don't repeat all these problems that the past has shown you, but then also go forward. And there are some things which are totally impossible. And then there are some possible futures. There are some probable, likely futures. And out of those probable futures, there are desirable futures. And as you see, the probable and the desirable futures, they don't necessarily overlap. Sometimes you have to do certain things in a very strong way to avoid some very, very undesirable futures. For instance, right now, there's a lot of discussion about AI replacing humans in many areas, in terms of jobs, in terms of what is needed from us. And I think there are many undesirable futures that are proposed. And again, I think together and with algorithms and data in hand, we can find out what futures are desirable and which ones we want to implement together. And so if you look at the history of models and you go back in time to as early as 1400 BC, there was the Oracle of Apollo at Delphi, and you had to walk a long way and you had to pay quite a bit of money and other dues to be able to use that oracle. And it was a very busy oracle. People really wanted that guidance in their lives. They wanted these answers. And it was interesting how it was set up. And since then, it hasn't stopped. There have been hydraulic models of economic equilibrium, which is quite interesting to know. And again, these are actually detailed on the next page, which you don't get to see here. But what you see here on the page is a timeline of different complexity sciences by Brian Castellani. It's actually a map in the exhibit. And this is the 2018 version, which he later on revised. And so in this map, you get to see what kind of system science models existed when, and when networks became stronger, or cybernetics came in, and what were the major experts that really promoted and advanced some of these approaches. And it's interesting to just zoom in and just explore that map for a while, because ultimately you have complexity sciences and mixed methods approaches in the social sciences to try to get us some kind of insight of the forces that are upon us and that we are part of. And then when you now get interested in models, you might wonder, well, which kind of model should I use? Should it be a conceptual model that you can write down on a napkin? Should it be a mathematical model that very much shows you how things unfold in a data-driven way over time? Should it be a computational model? Do I need to program or make friends with a programmer? Maybe. There are lots of programmers out there, and now we also have ChatGPT helping us program, and so in many cases you don't have to be a programmer anymore in order to have a piece of code that actually runs. And there are also fascinating physical models. Here you have a physical model of Earth that can be found at the Miraikan Museum in Tokyo. And if you have not been to the Miraikan and you happen to be in Tokyo, please do check it out. It's just the most fascinating place because they have really cool new robots on the floor. But they also have all kinds of other hands-on exercises for you to understand your place in the universe as we know it, but also to see a little bit into the future and to see what might happen in the near future. So again, there are these 4 different types of models, and they are differently valuable at different moments in time. Oftentimes you might start with a conceptual model and then start to have some mathematics behind, then start to implement it. And only if you have the money and foresight and you really want many people to explore it, you might go over to physical models, or you really use the physicality and you would have a hard time to do it otherwise. So I think there are these really 4 different types of models. So if we then look over to modeling goals, there are different phenomena of interest that have always interested people, like seasonalities, like winter and summer cycles. When should you sow your seeds? When should you harvest? What are these cycles in the job market? There are also cyclic oscillations going on. There's synchronization when people walk along a bridge in a marching order. The bridge will start moving along. They actually had to take one of the bridges in London and stop anyone from entering it because it seemed too dynamically unstable when people walked over it. So I think you have these events happening in normal people's lives, and you also have then mathematical models and computational models that simulate synchronization, for instance. Many of you might know about tipping points, where just smaller and smaller changes ultimately lead to a totally different state of the system and potentially can't revert it back. Or in some cases, like in on a playground where you just whip back and forth, it can be moved backwards. But in some cases it cannot, and there's a lot of discussion about climate change. If there is a tipping point that we will soon encounter, and then there is no coming back to what we have right now. Then, of course, there is adaptation and learning. Many of us, especially us in the academic setting, we are very, very fascinated and interested in having people learn efficiently and with great pleasures, as opposed to drudgingly and then hating learning for the rest of their lives. So I think we want people to embrace learning and to have fun with learning and to adapt to the environment as it changes faster and faster with AI and robotics and automation moving in. They are beautiful fractals that some of you might have seen and fallen in love with. There are diffusions, which we saw quite readily when the COVID pandemic raged over our planet Earth. And then, of course, there are also networks which are growing over time and are the substrate for the diffusion of ideas and gossip and anything else. So there are many, many of these phenomena, and models try to capture the elements of these phenomena, sometimes just one phenomena, sometimes multiple phenomena. And there are different model classes which are better or worse in capturing different phenomena. And so the Atlas of Foresight really takes some of the model classes, shows how they have been used to capture certain phenomena in support of explaining certain target system models, as they are called. So, for instance, Schelling's segregation model, here on page 41, you would typically use cellular automata to model that, and that then helps you understand percolation, fractals, and reaction diffusion dynamics as typically applied. So you can kind of go through these linkages here, and you will get to see what kind of phenomena of interest certain types of model classes help you model and which target systems you can then understand. The modeling framework that was proposed in the Atlas actually builds on and extends on the data visualization frameworks that was just discussed in the previous hour. And so here you have the typology of different insight needs and data scales and models and visualizations and graphic symbols and graphic variables and interactions. And that was extended to truly capture these predictive and descriptive models here as number 3. And they are, of course, under models here. And then you go around in that cycle from getting your data and analyzing and modeling the data, visualizing the data, interacting with these visualizations, ultimately validating and interpreting these visualizations, and then having new questions. So a good visualization would, yes, it would answer your questions, but it would also then most likely give you new questions to ask. And then you have to go around, get more data, analyze that data again, and visualize it again to help more people understand what is really going on, and zoom into an area or zoom out in some cases. And so these different typology types, like for instance, the graphic variables and the graphic symbols, they can also be tabulated, which you see up here, where you have different graphic variable types, such as spatial ones for position, X, Y, and also Z in 3 dimensions, form, which includes size and shape, color, such as color value and hue and saturation, but also texture, objects, and motion, which not all tools support, but more and more tools do support those, tabulated with graphic symbol types, which include geometric symbols, such as points, lines, but also areas and volumes not shown here. The table is actually much larger. You might remember that the full table was published in the Atlas of Knowledge. And then also linguistic symbols, type fonts, type font colors and sizes, and also pictorial symbols, such as churn of faces or very pictorial symbols of trees being alive or dead. And so with this modeling framework in hand, you can make it a science and not just an art form to construct models and then to visualize model results, and then to have human beings, human experts, but also those which are impacted by what is predicted, weigh in and help make informed decisions. And so here on the left-hand side, you see a different listing of modeling approaches by Bill Rouse. He looked at it in terms of different levels. So you have people that have certain behavior. For instance, patients have a certain behavior which can be modeled using agent-based models. You have some people which are risk averse or not. You have disease progression at the people level. And so again, there are different types of models that can be used to help us understand all of this better. Then you have processes, and again, very different concerns here and different types of models here. For instance, workflow, you might like to have network models because you get to see how a certain product makes it through the different stages of a manufacturing process, and ultimately getting to the customer via different supply chains. All of these benefit from network models. And then you have the level of organizations, which in some cases want to profit maximization or competition, or want to know more about investment. And again, there are different types of models relevant here. And finally, at the societal level, you might have, again, very different concerns and different associated models. And so it's really fascinating for me to say that almost every single science has developed these models. And then sciences actually trade these models with each other. So maybe a model developed for economic decision making is ultimately also applied to understand structure and dynamics of science. And it's super interesting to then use these models to understand your science, your part of science, and your place in that science, and what might happen in the near-term future. Here on the right-hand side, you have a better overview of how a model oftentimes comes into existence. So it takes, again, a village. You can't, typically, it's not a one-man or one-woman job. It takes a team. And the team oftentimes has a thematician or a subject matter domain expert who might be a policymaker, or might be an investor, or might be a private person who just has a certain question. Then you need somebody who deeply understands what models to use when. As you see, there are many, many different model types. Then you need a computational scientist who can take a model and implement it in a substantial way. And then oftentimes the computer scientist also has a programmer, because it takes time to implement a model. So this computer scientist might have initial pseudocode, and then the programmer actually implements it. And then the computer is also needed in order to execute all that code. And so you have the subject matter domain expert basically specifies the needs, providing a set of needs they have, a set of questions they have of why they want to see a certain element. And then that gets, this non-formal model gets encoded into a formal model via the modeler, and then gets further encoded into an executable model, and ultimately into a computational program that then gets run. And then, of course, you have to translate all of this back, because the results now have to be analyzed using also the analysis framework we just had on the previous slide, needs to be interpreted, or first of all visualized and then interpreted, and then needs to be applied into the context in which decision-making happens. Because sometimes the interpretation is not good enough to provide guidance to the subject matter domain expert on what to do now with all that knowledge in hand. So it really takes this translation down so that it can be run, and then up again so that it can be understood and implemented for decision making. So not easy. So how can model visualization work? And to be honest, it was a real challenge to write this atlas, because most of the visualizations that are used to communicate models are rather simple. You see them here on this spread. So rather primitive compared to some of the most beautiful maps that are found in the Mapping Science exhibit. But still, they show feedback cycles. They show the impact of certain parameter values on certain outcomes of the model. They show causal networks, and they also show flows and diffusions and graphs that exist when you start a modeling process. And so it's a challenge actually to use models efficiently, but they can be super valuable, especially if you now communicate what you're trying to implement and decide upon across these different expert teams. Ultimately, you must validate models, and you must validate them, especially if you have highly complex models, and the higher your business risk is. So the higher the business risk, the higher the complexity of the model, the more time you will spend on model validation. Because some models in the lower left corner, they might be almost trivial and there is no real business risk associated. like version control, for instance. But then as you go up both of these axes, more and more it becomes important to validate these models. And there are different types of QA, QC, quality assessment and quality control, which are also highlighted here. And so if you are in a position to have a model and you are in need to validate it, feel free to come back to this page. I mentioned that there are 10 different models introduced in the Atlas, and for each one of those models, there's just one double-page spread. So here you see the double-page spread for cellular automata, which go back to the 1940s, long before I was born, and maybe even long before my mom was born. And so you have a quite interesting history of how they came into existence. You have great examples of the game of life, which some of you might have played. There are some of the basic rules, and over time you just get beautiful patterns and kind of patterns that seem to be alive and walk over your screen. And ultimately, you can then use these models to also help you and all of us understand segregation in a city. So there is Schelling segregation model, which you, by the way, can also play online. And really understanding why that happens, why these little preferences that we have to be with people that are more similar to us, how these little preferences ultimately sometimes result in neighborhoods which look like this one here on the right-hand side, where you have maybe some areas that have certain populations, and then you have areas that have other populations, and it's not intermixed, but it's very much segregated. And even though many of us would prefer more mixed environments, because of these forces that are modeled in the Schelling segregation model, you oftentimes end up with something that's less desirable, talking about desirable futures. So again, here you would have cellular automata. You can find them in the set, and they were used to do Schelling segregation model, but also the aid and growth model, which you can read about on page 40. Then, of course, there are also network models. Here at Indiana University, we have more than 150 faculty members which study networks, networks in the social science, in the behavioral sciences, in the economic sciences, of course, networks of the internet, and networks in many, many other realms of life and professional work. And it's super interesting to see the history of networks, which go back to Leonhard Euler in 1735, in which year he used networks to conceptualize and ultimately solve the Königsberg's bridge problem. And so again, the history is always super interesting, because the more you go backwards, the more you can go forward. And what this page tries to do is to introduce key terminology, but also key network representations that are widely used to represent network graphs. And then also dive in a little bit into network topologies, because they matter. If you have a scale-free network and you take out some of the highly connected nodes, then very quickly the entire network becomes disconnected, and information and goods and viruses don't flow anymore. So in some cases you want that if you want to reduce the spreading of computer viruses, for instance, or the spreading of COVID. Then you don't want these super spreaders to be in the network. But if you want knowledge and learning to spread, then of course you want these teachers of teachers to be in the network. And ultimately it matters if you have a small world network or a scale-free network or a regular lattice. It matters for knowledge diffusion and also for the growth of these networks. So again, there are 10 of these network types introduced, and you might like to just browse through them and get more information on what exists so far and how you can use this in your personal life. And then in part 3, we have models in action. And it's interesting to keep in mind that these models don't operate in isolation. There are 6 substrates, as I call them, that absolutely impact future developments. There's health and education. If you have a population that has not been able to enjoy some of the education we have enjoyed, it's just much harder. Or if there are major health issues, like during COVID, Many people were just busy surviving, and that will impact how they learn, how they can work, how they can meaningfully contribute to our society. Natural resources matter. Some of us, some of you might have seen water shortages, food shortages because of raging wars which are going on right now. Also energy shortages. So all of that impacts what you as a human being can do. We have climate and weather, and with global warming and pollution, we have a lot of things that absolutely impact what we can do. And then, of course, these substrates we have, transportation on land, maritime and air, absolutely impact how information and goods and other things flow. Digitization, having access to internet and fast internet or not, it's amazing to me that we can run this 24-hour event around the globe so that anyone from anywhere can log in and listen to this live feed, which is fed by many of you, many experts around the globe. That this is possible now, totally unthinkable 20 years ago, absolutely impossible. But it's now feasible, and we hope that this event inspires many of you to invent your own 24-hour events and to invite us, please. And then, of course, there's also more and more urbanization. So more than 50% of people now live in big cities. And there's a trend towards this, even though with COVID, some people have decided to live in remote areas, but those areas, if they have good internet access, you can now work anywhere. You can deal with all the time zone issues. So again, that all impacts how we live and learn and create our lives. And then when you start modeling, you really have different questions. You might have when questions about when things happen, and here temporal models are super valuable. You might have where questions, which gets you over to geospatial models that look at the diffusion of COVID over the global landscape earlier, kind of as fast as somebody could walk or be on a horse to the next city. And now very much using the airline traffic network, which gets you to arrive in the middle of big urban centers, and then it very quickly spreads from there. So the spreading pattern is super different now than it used to be. Or topical models helping you to understand what is spreading. So these are linguistic models, large language models included, that now help you to understand how certain substrates make it easier or harder to spread news or gossip. And then on the right-hand side, you have network models, which really try to answer with whom questions. So who is talking to whom, who is contributing to what project, who is part of which team, who is part of which local neighborhood, and it matters. The different communities you're part of ultimately together make up what you can do in your life. And then there are different scales. So ultimately, we want to have a system science approach where we look at the microscale and the mesoscale and the macroscale, and we understand how they interdepend on each other. But this is very challenging, and there are very few approaches that would actually help us do that. So oftentimes, we actually have models either at the microscale, at the individual scale, just me and my networks, my geospatial environment, or at the mesoscale, my region, my neighborhood, my team at work, my family. So these are smaller scales which are already aggregated up and super important for us. But again, not yet at the macro scale, which is on the right-hand side, which really looks at entire countries, entire spatial regions. And the challenges and opportunities that you encounter at these different scales are really quite different from each other. And shown here, you have some of these examples. But then we go into this at much more detail by looking at education, science, technology, and policy across these scales. So the remaining pages in part 3 really give you the education level at the micro scale. They introduce you to models of science at the micro scale and also models of technology and policy at the micro scale. So 4 pages, double pages on that. And then you have science, technology, policy, education at the meso scale, always with 3 examples for each double page spread. And then last but not least, education, science, technology, and policy, because these are some of the 4 major stakeholders that we oftentimes model for at the macro level. And again, very different models are applied, very different insights are gained. And many of these models have been implemented in practice and really were used to inform decision-making by educational experts, by science experts, by technology experts, but also by policymakers. So hopefully you get to check some of those out. And if you're an educator, you might just go cherry pick on page 74. On page 82 and on page 90. Again, the part 4 is really showcasing all the cool maps that are in the exhibit, and it's always nice to have them in a book format because oftentimes people encounter the exhibit by coming to a specific event, like for instance coming to the World Economic Forum, and then out of nowhere there are maps of science. Or coming to a library system and yep, there are maps of science and there are 100 of them, and it's really hard to then browse through them all. So the trilogy really tries to make it easy to have time, spend time with these maps. And even if you spend just 5 minutes with the 100 maps, that's a lot of minutes. So again, there's a rich world of maps to be explored. And then in other cases, we have brought the Illuminate diagram or the maps to the Smithsonian Folklife Festival. This is an outside festival, so it was rather hot. I think I see Liesel here. And in other cases, it's on the floor of certain high-performance computing conferences. Or at the Mundaneum in Mons, Belgium. Beautiful space. If you have not been there, please go and visit. And in other cases, we brought it to academic institutions and even had theater piece. Actually, that was related to understanding data, the big data beanstalk. So I think we have the video somewhere, and maybe it's part of the videos that are running later tonight. For these 30 maps that are covered in the atlas, you have here an overview of all of these 30 maps, and hopefully you get to spend time with them, not just in their static form as they are in the book, but also in their interactive form, because many of them actually have an interactive component. Even though they were rendered as a map and framed, in many cases you can go to an online website and play with them. And then the final part of the Atlas, part 5, is all about envisioning desirable futures. And that's hard because sometimes you can't even see our futures. And now we have to pick those futures that are best for all of us, not just for me or my team, but really for all of us around the globe. And so we try to highlight some modeling opportunities with using global real-time data, with embracing human-machine symbiosis, not competing with each other, but augmenting each other. And also machine-human interfaces, where really we can take the best of both worlds of the analog substrate, the biological substrates that we are, and the digital silicon substrate that machines and computers are made of. And ultimately augment human intellect, but also augment humans with exoskeletons in order to change what they can do and improve what they can do in their lives if they had an accident or something went wrong during their lives, just making them stronger and happier and healthier and more productive and fulfilled. I think the human flourishing is really, really near and dear to many of our hearts. And it's really important for us all to understand what it means to flourish. We know that there's a lot of human bias baked into us. We all have it. And it's important for us to know that we have these biases, to overcome these biases and to proactively counteract these biases. And this spread just points out a number of works that have very vividly shown that we have certain data and gender and generational and own species biases. The own species biases very much come up to front when we talk about AI moving in, but also having other biases which really make us see not as clear and make us as good a decision maker as we could be. And so again, knowing about these biases will make it much easier to overcome these biases. Many countries and regions are very proactively building capacity so that they are ready for this new world where we have much more AI in our world, in our lives, where we have much more automation, many more robots, many more automation in our professional lives, but also I think in our personal lives soon. And it's interesting to understand how we define success, and also how we ultimately measure human capacity and scholarly capacity and the capacity of regions to embrace this change and to make it your own and to benefit from it ultimately, not just be impacted by it in a passive kind of way, but to proactively shape our futures. And I'm very, very interested to have actionable forecasts. So oftentimes you tell people the result of a forecast and they can't do a thing because it's not their responsibility. They don't have the authority to make these kind of decisions or make these actions. But it's really important that we create forecasts that really people can act on. And we all have different roles to play and we all act at different levels. And so it's important for us to not just see our world with new eyes, and I think visualizations can really help here, but also ultimately to visualize the futures we could have. And one piece we did, and I think the science forecast is actually going to show as one of the video sessions we have during the night hours, is that we mocked up science forecast, science and technology forecast. So you have the lady in red here in front of the large display wall that you just saw for the first hour of the live event. And she is presenting to you what just happened in science and what weather forecast is to be predicted for the next days, including also research areas which just got funded or just had major papers come out, accumulated quite a few citations recently, had bursts of activity in terms of news. And we hope that this also inspires others to think through what it would take to have every evening, not just predictions of the weather for the next day. And even those are not always correct. My husband was pointing out this morning when it was raining, even though it was only very no percent of chance of rain, but also to have predictions that show what might happen in science next, because something was funded, some new technology just came into existence and will make it possible to have certain breakthrough results. And so it's super interesting on my end to bring this insight to many more people than those which encounter the exhibit or read this book. And so how would we do this? And if you're interested, please talk with us. I have a few extra slides, but there might be questions. Todd, should we go over to questions? Otherwise, I can continue here.
Yes, there's a couple of questions that we have. The first is, how does AI make it easier or harder to predict the future? Or predict futures, not the future, but futures.
I believe we absolutely need to bring in AI. We just have so much good data now, high quality data also. And many have now seen what large language models and other AI can do for us, for human beings. I think it would be a shame not to bring them in and have them work on these data sets. But then, of course, they would be guided by human intellect, and it would be a dance of human and machine intelligence. And we would together identify what is likely to happen and how to deal with climate change, how to create learning environments that are basically personalized learning for anyone, right? And I don't know if you have tried that, but you can now in Germany go to the German ChatGPT and ask it all kinds of questions. And if you don't understand the answer, for instance, if you have a certain question about a certain disease, and you don't understand the answer, you just ask again and again and again. And ChatGPT very, very kindly and patiently will explain it to you in easier and easier words in German. And this is amazing. I mean, we didn't have this a year ago. And in other areas, mathematics, which is very well structured data, beautiful. You can just ask again and again until you really understand something. You can have it applied to a certain daily routine of yours. Law, if you ever have a question about what fine you would face if you have headphones while driving in a car, it just will explain that to you. And it's really enriching many people's lives. They don't need to ask experts necessarily. They might like to still follow up the sources, but ChatGPT can really explain and find that for you now in a much better way than a Google search, and explain it to you in all kinds of languages. And also, if you want to, you don't have to read and write. So you could be a child or somebody who doesn't know how to read and write, and you could still get good answers. So I think that's really impressive new functionality, which we absolutely should embrace. And we do have an entire panel at 11 o'clock tomorrow morning, 11:18, that brings in experts from IBM and many other places to discuss how AI impacts our lives, how it impacts data visualizations, and how it causes new needs for data visualizations, and ultimately, hopefully, creates better interfaces to data sets that now exist and to all the rich algorithms that can be used to model and predict desirable futures.
I noticed when you were presenting the Atlas of Forecast, you said 2 or 3 times that this was difficult. And I wondered, like, was this the most difficult of the books to write? Did this
Yes.
keep you up at night and going, oh my gosh, what if I...
Yeah. There were times
when
when, multiple times when I almost gave up. I'm like, no, can't be done. No, can't. And I really enjoyed how you presented some of the iterations of the trials and tribulations you go through for putting always stuff on just 2 pages. So there is a problem there because some topics really would benefit from more space and others maybe only fill up 1.5 pages. So how do you deal with that? But there are ways. But then also making sure this is really the up-to-date information. This really requires a network of experts and colleagues and friends that you can draw on and can use to make sure this is the best materials that at that moment in time existed. Obviously, the Atlas is out now for a few years and time has moved on. There are now new data sets, new models, new visualizations that are not covered, right? And I'm not necessarily planning to have another iteration of the book. I think it just shows what was possible at that moment in time. And I think some of the knowledge is forever knowledge. This will not change. But then some other knowledge is short-term knowledge, real-time knowledge, and that will change. And unfortunately, many of the interactive maps that come with the first iteration of the exhibit, the 100 maps that are featured there, many of these interactive maps start not working so well any longer. And that's really a shame. So I think what we should do is to just make more videos of them, because it's really cool what you can do when you can start to interact with the data set. Looking at it just on a static layout is already amazing, but and probably worth 1,000, each visualization is worth 1,000 words. But if you now have an interactive data visualization, totally different. And again, that's where the macroscopes come in. That's why we have this section.
Yeah, it's good to have a historical record. I was just saw the other day a comparison. They showed the the game Grand Theft Auto, which I haven't played, but it's very popular. And they showed the difference between its earliest iteration and its newest one. The earliest one didn't look bad, but the newest one was just so populated and full and busy and vibrant. And you just realize how much happens in a short period of time in terms of these improvements. And I think we see, although we do have some really good macroscopes in that very first iteration that I think still look stunning and you know, still hold up very well. But yeah, it's just getting better and better, and it's good to document that process. And I agree with having a video record of those. So that's the only way we can do it, I guess, you know, is because they are ephemeral. But
Yeah, well, I always enjoy also going to the Wayback Machine, which shows
oh
the
yeah,
internet in its very early stages. And some of these internet websites which say archived actually still work. So you can click on things and go to next page. And man, we have come a long way since the very beginning
in terms
of
of
the
design, yeah.
We should probably put some of those links into the chat and then maybe also on the website, because I think people really enjoy browsing these resources. And again, the more you can go back in time, the more you can kind of project forward, because in some cases it's just linearly, like processor speed has been going up in a very predictable way. Some other elements have been changing in a very predictable way. And again, the more you go back, the more you can go back, go forward.
Well,
So
great.
let me
Thank you.
maybe finish up here with a few more slides. I was hoping to have a little bit of time to show some recent projects.
Yeah.
So one project we did together with Stasha, and Stasha Milievich here is a colleague of mine, and Filippi Nascimento, Italian postdoc, was on visualizing big science projects. So we were super interested to see in how far big projects in astronomy and physics are unfolding over time. And some of these projects, they are like 30 years long projects. So if you start that project as a postdoc with 20 and then you grow up in that project and you stay with this, because this is a big CERN environment or a big astronomy telescope, then by the time you're done, you're 55, right? So from 25 to 55, you worked in one team using one telescope, building it, using it, making it valuable to others, making all the data sets available, and really almost growing old with it. And so these big projects are really quite different from the normal science projects where you have one faculty member or maybe a team of faculty members working very closely together over 2, 3, 4, 5 years max, and then regrouping each other with each other, maybe continuing in the next project again together, but oftentimes working in different teams from there on. And so we were very curious to also see how these big projects in astronomy and in physics compare or not compare, are different from the projects that are unfolding in the biomedical sciences. So here you have Atlas and Börner, and then also LIGO and IceCube, compared and contrasted with the Human Genome Project and the HubMap projects that my team is part of, and the Human Cell Atlas, which really supports 2,000 plus researchers around the globe to create a Human Cell Atlas. So how does it differ? And one thing you immediately see is that the interdisciplinary coverage that these biomedical projects have are very different from the astronomy and physics projects. And what does this mean? And also in the biomedical sciences, you don't have one big environment, one big telescope or instrument. You have many, many, many teams working in their local labs on generating new data, new insights, new methods, new infrastructures, data portals, and so on. And so it was super interesting for us to see also the spread of knowledge over time for different areas. So here for some of the, for IceCube, compared and contrasted to the biomedical sciences, which has much more interdisciplinary coverage over time. Another piece we did was to look at the future of learning and work. And we had a workshop at the Futurium in Berlin, which is a beautiful museum on the future of us all. 5 minutes from the central train station in Berlin. If you have a chance, please go. And we had the exhibit on display, but then we also used the seminar rooms there to discuss an open digital future and also perspectives on how data and machine learning and some of the other new technology developments does impact education and job markets. And of course, there will be jobs that don't exist any longer for human beings, but there will be other jobs which are way more desirable and interesting for human beings and less dangerous and hopefully less stressful also, that are valuable to all of us. And so it's then interesting to see how, again, computational predictive models and visualizations can help us identify how we want to run this future of learning and work. And then we were very proud to host the International Society of Scientometrics and Infometrics conference here in Bloomington, Indiana, this July. And I'm glad to report that all the conference presentations are now and papers are now linked from this website. So we will share the link so that others which are interested in science of science studies, and there are some predictive models in there, can access this unique set of papers. And I think that's the last slide I had. So I'm very much thankful for the opportunity to present here. And Todd, thanks so much for moderating. I don't know if there are any other questions. You're muted. Todd, you're muted.
Sorry about that. It says, hello, my question is about the effect of visualization on elementary education, adult literacy, workforce retraining, easing interaction for people struggling with dementia. So
wow, that's a lot of different stakeholders. Yeah, many different stakeholders. So we have worked with children because many of us are parents, and we brought our kids to many of the events, including the exhibit events. And there's actually elements for children. There's a puzzle piece that you can do with your children. And that's also linked from the scimaps.org website. In terms of, for the last stakeholder group, dementia patients, we have not interacted, but we have worked on visualizations for understanding epilepsy patients and how they benefit from certain data resources and how they don't benefit from it. So we interlinked many different data sets there, worked very closely with the Epilepsy Foundation to understand what data visualizations would be valuable. For instance, seeing on a geospatial map what clinical trials are going on and if they're eligible to apply, or giving them very, very simple daily schedules of what they need to do and what pills to take when, etc. So I think they are very simple visualizations that can be super effective for certain populations. But I think I'm out of time now. I would love to answer that question via chat if you let me.
Okay.